Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Mission Matters. My name is Adam Torres, and if you'd like to apply to be a guest on the show, just head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, so today I have Ekta Vyas on the line, and she is Deputy Chief Human Resources Officer at UC Davis Health, and also Adjunct Management Faculty with San Jose State University. Ekta, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here, Adam. Thank you for having me here today.
Oh, so excited to have you on the show today. And our topic today, reimagining leadership and transformation. I know as you and I were brainstorming topics and thinking about, what we could bring to the audience, what kind of value, your PhD dissertation and this work that you've been doing for many years came up, and excited to dive into that with you, along with some of the Forbes contributor articles that you've submitted and that you've been published for. And then, not to spoiler it for our audience, but Ekta will also be a featured author in one of our upcoming books. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But Ekta, just to get us kicked off, we'll start this episode the way that we start them all, with our Mission Matters Minute. So Ekta, we at Mission Matters, we amplify stories for entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. That's our mission. Ekta, what mission matters to you?
So the mission for which I'm here today, Adam, leadership and transformation. That's the mission that matters to me. I'll speak a little bit to it. With a career span of over 25 years now, I've mostly grown in leadership roles where transformational change was needed. It just happened to me, not that I was purposefully seeking those kinds of roles, but I ended up stepping into roles where I'm either building programs or revamping programs and teams and structures. So I've primarily been a change agent in most of the roles where I've stepped in, and my work has been a reflection of my aptitude and strength as a transformational leader. Of course, I realized that gradually, right? As I said, I didn't, grew up to be a transformation leader, but I realized gradually that I have those key traits to be successful at leading transformational change in organizations, partially because I had the resilience to navigate challenges that came with leading transformations, partially with what's needed to challenge the status quo that comes with selling your vision, actually, to those who can't see it yet, right? That's one thing about being a transformation leader. And partially because the roles that I've chosen, despite knowing in full awareness that, there's a lot to be done there, were primarily, attractive to me because they were going to give me an opportunity to make a difference. And that's very, very, very important to me. Am I stepping somewhere where I can make a difference, move the needle, and over, anything else, maximize the potential of the teams and the people that I work with, because that's so important to get to a transformed state of being for organizations, right? Also for yourself. So, I'll just say that, with that introduction of my leadership journey and my leadership, where my leadership ability lies, if I were to wrap up, the mission, I would say what matters to me is sensible, thoughtful, and system-oriented decision-making that can facilitate a collective journey, for all those that are involved towards a better future for the organizations I serve.
It's great. I love bringing mission-based individuals on the line to share why they do what they do, like what gets them up and motivated to go out there into the marketplace and to make a difference. So it's great having you on the show. And just to go a little bit further into your background, I know you mentioned this was a journey, and I feel like we're all on our own journeys, of course, right? Whether yours happens to be leading you towards becoming, an expert in leadership and transformation, which you are. Others are, doing other fields, of course, and they have their own callings. But I always find it interesting to figure out, like from my guests, like, was there in this journey and in this transition, I should say, was there a point in time, or was there that you can think of when you were like, okay, this is what I want to do? And it might have been pre-PhD. It might have been during that whole time period. I don't know when it was. I'm just curious to hear, like, when did you know that was going to be part of your calling?
It's a very interesting question. I've not paused so far to think what was the point where, I thought that was my calling. I reflected back to my journey and realized that was my calling. I mean, to put it in the best way. But But I'll still try to answer your question. As I said, I've kind of quite accidentally initially in my career stepped into transformational change roles.
Yeah.
When I was a management consultant, before I got into like real full-time positions in organizations, I was a management consultant and did smaller projects. I did one for IBM, and I was a consultant for an organization called Zomax. And most of the time I was going in and dealing with things that weren't working well. And, if what we would call a mess. I mean, let me just put it out there, right? You're stepping into mess. And actually doing pretty well, right? Not realizing that you're doing pretty well. When that continued for quite some time, and then my first job happened, and again, it was a transformational role. And then my second real job happened, and I'm getting into, staying in areas where people are running away. Like there's turnover in 6 months, people are running away, and there's leadership changes. One of the things that stood out for me was I was able to not just attract and retain team members, but I was able to motivate them and engage them. And, to the extent that, I feel very fortunate and do take pride that I've almost, for most places where I've worked, I've had, very high engagement in my team members. So when I got to my PhD journey, right, and I started reflecting on what do I want to study, it was really not so much driven by, I'm impressed by how I'm engaging the teams, but it's like, what is it that actually gets the team engaged, especially when you're dealing with so much transformation and so much mess? What makes them stay? What is it in the leader that resonates with them and, that makes them come to work every day? And I think that was the reason why I selected the dissertation, expertise topic that I selected, which was understanding the association between leaders. Actually, it was specifically leaders' emotional intelligence and workforce engagement during transformational change. And how do you make that happen? And what kind of leaders make that happen? And if you're not one of those, how can you get to that point where you can make that happen?
I love that you share that. And the reason why I oftentimes ask my guests this question is because we're on this path, and to assume that we have everything figured out in advance. I mean, if somebody would have told me that I was going to say in college or even high school or something, say, I'm going to grow up and be a podcaster. What? I don't even know if podcasts exist, right? Like, so sometimes this journey in our calling, it kind of, it can kind of grab us, and we can, like you said, sometimes you look backwards and you're like, oh, okay, you're connecting the dots that way. So thank you for sharing that. I always love to hear somebody's journey there. So going just maybe a step further along that line. So, there'll be some people that watch this interview that have an interest, and maybe they're a little bit earlier in their career, right? Or just graduating college or a little bit further on, and they're thinking about this idea of really pursuing a career towards this idea of leadership and helping others. To me, you have a certain gift, and that's my words, like you have a certain gift for this, like some of the things you said, having high engagement, all these other things, like you really put your heart into your work. So I'm curious what you would tell maybe that next generation of leaders that maybe want to kind of follow in your footsteps, maybe in terms of thinking about a career in leadership or helping organizations with leadership. Well, in today's environment, what kind of things would you tell them?
So I think, in the question that you asked, Adam, what's important is in today's environment, right? As I was reflecting on the conversation we were going to have, which is happening right now, and I was thinking about leadership and transformation, I keep going back to, I'm an avid reader. I learn a lot from the work of others, that what people have done, what they've said, because there's so much thought leadership out there in the industry, and there's so much wisdom out there in the industry. If you really want to tap into it and kind of absorb that and imbibe that in how you lead yourself and how you lead the organizations that you serve. But if you just stick to in today's times, I think, one of the things I'm going to highlight is transformation and leadership. We can talk about different times when transformational change has happened. And right now there's a lot of conversations around, how organizations have to change, how leadership has to change. And, where we are right now, we've just survived a pandemic. And, I would basically say to the future generation that there can be too much information coming your way, too much data coming your way, to the extent that you just can't comprehend it and can't stop and think what to do with it, right? It brings me back to thinking about a book I read, which is The Truth About Leadership, right? And it's the same authors that wrote the book, The Leadership Challenge, which is like a like a seminal book, right, in the area of leadership. And one of the things that the authors have said in Truth About Leadership is understand leadership and transformation from the perspective of context versus content. When you say, how has leadership evolved, or what was leadership 30 years back, and what is expected of a leader now, or what will we expect of a leader 30 years from now, which goes back to your question, what would you say to aspiring leaders of future generations? The content of leadership doesn't change. The qualities of an effective leader, what leadership means, what leadership is supposed to do in organization has stayed the same. The research will evolve, definitely, and it's going to draw association with whatever are the pressing business issues in the current times in regards to what kind of leadership was effective in resolving those issues, right? But the content of leadership, what makes an effective leader doesn't change from time to time. It's the context in which they operate changes. And the context in which they operate changes will test which abilities they have and do they have the strengths to be successful in leading in those particular times, right? So it's really, really important to understand that, right? There's not all of a sudden one, fine morning we wake up and the world's upside down and, oh my goodness, now we need this kind of leader. Right? You just have to shift gears as a leader and realize and recognize this is the need of the time. So, the other thing I would say is, the word transformation is used a lot, okay, especially in the context of leadership. And if you talk about the current times, and I look at, I constantly look at what other people are publishing, what other thought leaders saying, right? It makes me a little bit, afraid when I look at everything that's out there and the data that's sent our way and challenging us to take action and challenging us to just do something different in the organizations. One of the things in the current times you have to realize is a lot of transformation has already happened in the last 2 years. If you just stick to the current times, and the current times I'm defining as the tail end of a pandemic that we survived, right? I call it the tail end because it's not gone altogether yet, right? So if you look at that, and we talk about transformation, reimagining leadership, reimagining transformation, it's very important to realize we have already transformed. We have transformed from where we were 2 years back. And we have transformed both from a leadership perspective within the organizations. The organizations have transformed, in operating the way they were operating. And in our personal lives, we have transformed from the perspective of how we looked at well-being, how we looked at work-life balance, how we looked at, just approach of what do we need from our careers in our employer-employee relationship, right? So we've already gone through a lot of transformation. And, I'd really, really emphasize, to the audience and whoever's listening is to be very careful in just being in a reactionary mode of saying, oh, there's a lot of transformation going on. I got to transform. Because the first thing that's needed is to pause and say, we were forced to transform. Where did that bring us? Where did that land us as an organization? And all organizations and industries and all of us in our personal lives landed at a different place. So our starting point is that place. In organizations, it's jointly between leadership and workforce, in our personal life with our families and friends. And then define what this transformational journey is for you going forward, right? And what kind of leadership is needed for that.
It's great. It's a great point, and I completely concede and applaud that answer that we've changed. It's done. It's changed, and now this is a new starting point that we can start thinking about what we build and what's next, right? And what the future of an organization looks like, what the future of the world looks like, really, politics, everything. It's all changed. And we're in this, and it's going to continue to change. And I mean, we could argue rate of change, all these other things, but the point is change is not stopping. So going, I guess, a little bit more on the same topic. So we've you've given a great overview, I feel, of present day and what's going on with change and transformation and leadership. So now, and I don't want this to seem like an unfair question, because that's not how I mean it. But when we think about the executives today that are making decisions, and I don't want to oversimplify this, because of course every organization is going to be different. There's going to be different like indicators and implications. So we know that. But if I could get you maybe to think about, or to let us know maybe some of the themes, some of the broader themes in leadership that the CEOs or the C-suite should be thinking about right now, considering that, things have changed?
So it's a heavy lift question, Adam.
Mm-hmm.
It is not that it's been asked for the first time, and not that there are not thought leaders writing about it, what the C-suite should be thinking about.
Yeah.
And, with this question presented to me, I'm going to simplify this. I'm just going to simplify this. And what I'm going to say is, there's a saying that there are some things you can only learn in a storm. Right? There's
good.
some things that you can only learn in a storm. And if we take that seriously, and if, you talk about the C-suite, you talk about the business leaders, and if we stop and say, what did the storm teach me? Right? And what did that storm teach us is the value proposition that the workforce is looking from the employers and from the leaders that they're working for, that they're working with, right? And I think that's the crux, that's the gist of the key learnings that leadership should have had, ideally, from going through this storm. Of course, the journey through this transformational change may have been different for different industries, different organizations, because some industries really were very badly hit. Other industries like healthcare had to serve, right, in this particular pandemic. And there were certain areas of even healthcare that wasn't the service that was been called for. So those areas saw some impact. But, if you were talking about words of wisdom here, I would basically, put forth the fact that the relationship between the employer and the employee from the perspective of what is the value you're creating through your leadership, and how do they see your leadership from the perspective of having humanitarian traits, humanitarian characteristics. For a long time, we've talked about put people first. Right. I was surfing through the web and I came across multiple articles that say, oh, you have to put humans first. You have to put people first. And I'm like sitting in my chair. I'm saying, we weren't putting people first. Humans first. If that was the case, why so? Yeah. Right. So what it means is when we say reimagine, right, when we say reshape, when we say renew, somewhere along the line in our journey, in our day-to-day pursuit of just achieving the business goals, if we drop the ball on that human element, it has just resurfaced. It has resurfaced like we would not have imagined. But the difference this time is it's not prescriptive. It's not prescriptive for leaders coming from thought leaders or, evidence-based management practice or research. It's a lived experience this time, right? It's coming from people's lived experiences. So the difference now for the C-suite is, yes, the management pundits were telling you, put people first, right? And you probably got half of it. Now those people are telling you, put people first, because you're getting that message from the lived experiences, right? Yeah. So the concept of value-based leadership that has existed in the leadership world for a very long time, that concept of value-based leadership, now the calling for leaders is from values to action. Okay. It's not like pre-pandemic. We didn't have mission statements that talked about people. We've not had vision statements that talked about humans, right? Especially, I've served healthcare for a very long time, and that's the mission we are in. That's the purpose we are here for every single day, right? And regardless of that, even in a healthcare setting, managing the workforce, the lens that the CXOs and the C-suite has to take in how they are going about the relationship building with their folks is different, regardless of the fact that they have been in the service of humanity as a business, as a purpose for why they exist, right? So that's honestly the overarching theme for me. I can get into the semantics of how the businesses are changing and the industries are changing and your targets and your goals and everything. But if you really think about, if you look at it as a system, right? If you look at it, I'm very much driven by a system perspective. I'm like a system thinking person, from the time I did my dissertation. And, I'm a big fan of Schramer, whose book was, and whose theory of transformational change was the theoretical framework that I used to study transformational change and the association between leaders and workforce engagement. And one of the things that he proposed was, how do you go from ecosystem to an ecosystem economy, right? It's all about transformational change. And I think that's what has surfaced the most for the C-suite is you really have to give up your old mental models of how you were leading, and you have to embrace the ecosystem now. You have to just shed that. It's a lot of unlearning. It's a lot of unlearning, and it's a lot of new learning. And that's where it actually goes back to again, heightening your emotional intelligence. And, it's interesting you asked me this question, because when I did my research and I selected the concept of emotional intelligence for leaders, the reason I selected that was I was looking at where's the gap, for what hasn't been studied. And not that transformational change had not been studied, not that EI hadn't been studied or engagement hadn't been studied, but these variables coming together to see, if you have this gap, how does that change the context and the relationship between the leader and those that they're leading? And it really stood out as a gap. And I think there's so much pressing need, more than ever before, for the leaders, whether they are C-suite or they're not C-suite, to bring that self-awareness up, which is part of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is self-awareness and the awareness of others. And the current transformation is about social experimentation. Right? It was really more of not just a business shift. It was really more of a social shift that is now reshaping the way we do business. So, it can sound complex, but honestly, if you get into it, I would have to first change myself to change the world. Right? That's where leaders have to start from.
Right. And so now that we've, let's just say we've all been through this collective storm, we could call it, because we're all going through it. It's a shared experience, the world's affected here. And now we're maybe, as you mentioned earlier, maybe on the tail end of that, still around, of course, but maybe on the tail end. I think about this often. So how different industries are affected. So this may not be the perfect analogy, but I think about in healthcare, maybe how the adoption rate, whether it's from the provider or from the end user, the patient, of telehealth, telemedicine, we know the numbers there, it grew quite a bit out of need and out of necessity. So maybe that portion of the industry in healthcare had exceeded or benefited quite a bit in terms of how it was able to transform and progress based on the external factors that we all know we're going through right now. So when I think about if I was to kind of juxtapose or say that and kind of make the comparison of something like that to leadership, do you think maybe an opportunity for leadership to have quite a bit of advancement, specifically in that relationship between putting people first and the employer and employee, that whole relationship? Do you think it's possible?
I think it has happened to a large extent.
Yeah.
Even
it's a good thing. It's a great thing, right? I think it is. I don't know.
So here's the beauty of the current scenario. I call it the beauty of the current scenario.
Yeah.
And that's why I use the term, there are certain things you only learn in a storm, right?
Yeah.
When we have researchers doing research, coming back, bringing the findings, there's, you may be familiar. I take pride in being a scholar practitioner. I am a big fan of evidence-based management. I teach that to my students. This semester, I'm teaching a class on organizational behavior, plus my MBA students on managing in a global economy, right? So I tell them about evidence-based management, and I have faith in it. But when you talk about those are only practitioners, right, or those are only scholars, there's a great divide between scholars and practitioners, academia and the practicing world, because and they're both right in their own, in their own place and space, right? It's you don't understand us. But if you blend the two areas, going back to the question you asked me, prior to the pandemic, it's one thing to bring leadership development to the organization and say, this is what research is telling you how you should lead, right? Then comes the pandemic, right? Yeah. You are by law forced to send people home. You are by law mandated to provide them certain types of leaves. You are by law, managed to do certain things. And all of a sudden, you're managing in a different world. You're managing the way you had not conceived of yourself managing, and you manage very effectively. You liked it or not, that's a different case, right? You may not have liked doing that, Was it burdensome on
Well
leaders?
said.
It was, right? Leadership,
Yeah.
who sees leadership as a bed of roses? It isn't, right? It can be a calling and it can be burdensome. And, it's like you asked for it, you stepped into it. So now live with it, right?
Yes.
Exemplify what it means to be a leader. But the reason I say the beauty of the times we've passed by is what was been put forth by research. What are the traits you need to lead effectively, to be an effective leader? Leaders were put in a position to exemplify that and embrace those. And even if it was difficult in the beginning of the pandemic, and you're thinking, how am I going to run my company? How am I going to run the business? How am I going to meet my targets? People are not here. I cannot performance manage. I can't, I don't know what they're doing, behind this video where I only see their picture. I don't see them.
Right.
Everything right. But you survived and you shifted to the place where you know how to manage performance in a remote environment. Right. You had greater confidence in when people work from home. Yes, productivity happens.
Like we can do it. Yes.
You can do it. Right. So the beauty of this thing is it's really not prescriptive. You've gone through lived experience. And, if you're a smart leader, right, and you and you are a leader that learns from storms, you're going to stop and reflect and pause and say, I was apprehensive about certain things. Guess what? I'm probably over those apprehensions now, and I know how to manage better and how to lead better. There may be certain questions that remain unanswered for you.
Of course.
Right. And you probably have to work with it. But it's a lived experience. It's not a prescriptive message or a recipe that a leadership development expert consulting firm is bringing to you and saying, put humans first. You've gone through an experience where what will happen if you don't put humans first, right? So I think that's the beauty. You've got to see what positive came out of what we just endured and what we just went through, right? And I think, as hard as it has been for the entire humanity, honestly, the social structures, it's really, really, really totally talk about VUCA, volatile, uncertain, ambiguous, what the C is like. I'm trying to recall the C is complex, right? VUCA is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. What could be a better example of living in a VUCA world than what we just survived, right? And you talk about transforming in a VUCA world, right? So it's a lived experience, honestly. And I think there was a lot of takeaway for leaders, and most leaders have changed from the place they were operating at prior to the pandemic. There's only going forward now, honestly. If you're smart enough and if you're emotionally intelligent, don't look back to your old mental models. That's what I'm going to say.
Yeah, to me, it just gives me hope for humanity when I look at this and being, I try to be a systemic thinker and think about, the system of it all. And I'm thinking about at one point we run farms and us moving into a, industrialized, post-industrialization, kind of society before that, like this pendulum that keeps swinging on whether we're more, for the, whether we're thinking about the humanity of the workplace or whether we're just looking at output, like that pendulum kind of is swung back and forth through time, through many different civilizations. And to see where we're going, like at this moment in time that I feel I have the privilege to live in, I'm like, wow, like the employees, like the people that are actually putting their sweat and their labor into whatever their particular output is in field. Now there is the possibility for a very sustainable, good relationship. To me, it's just a pretty hopeful time, but that's my slant on it. So I want to just kind of shift a bit here. And I do have a couple other things that I want to make sure I get your input on with our time here today. Well, first is I know you're a Forbes influencer. You put out quite a bit of articles on various topics, transformation, leadership, and other topics. I'm going to make sure that we put some of the links to those articles in the show notes so that our listeners and our viewers can just go on and go check out your pages and some of your other articles. But what I'd like to get from you is, what are some of the themes that you like to write about and that you hope that your readers gain from your Forbes articles and work?
Well, So I'm definitely, as I said, I'm a management scholar practitioner. So if you really look at all of my Forbes influencer articles, I've been with Forbes since I'm trying to recall 2017, if I 2017 or 2018, and I've been writing for Forbes since then. Most of my contributions as a Forbes influencer have been around what's the pressing challenge, right? What's going on at present. So that's why the most recent articles you cited are about culture. They are about change. They're about transformation. They're about leadership. What I would really, if you were asking me I would want them not just to read my articles. I would want them to read many other thought leaders, right? There's so much out there. But there are a couple of things that I would emphasize in this conversation as I have this opportunity. There is a lot to be understood about definitely culture, but the elements that make or break a culture. Primarily because culture is something, when you talk about leadership, when you talk about transformation, when you talk about the shift in the business landscape, again, if you go from Schramer's concept of ecosystem to ecosystem realities, and you're changing and transforming the business, one of the things, that's important to realize is changing the business is changing the externality, right? You're changing the externality from the perspective of what's the outcome you want from the business. But you can't change that externality if your internal realities are not shifting, right? Because the matter of the fact is, it's your workforce that will help you get to that destination and get you that outcome. Leaders can have the vision, they can have the strategies, but your workforce, your people are going to get you there. And that's why I go back to the concept of culture, because culture is that enabler for you, right? And what is culture? Culture is basically the attitudes, the assumptions, the beliefs which are shared among the members of an organization, right? In how we work here, how things get done here, right? Who we are, right? A lot of that is tacit, it's underlying, it's not set out openly, but it's understood amongst the members of the organization. So the biggest challenge that I see that honestly in this transformational age that I see is, we were forced to transform, we transformed, and we responded. The workforce responded, the leaders responded. Now it's deliberate. It's easy, to get on board when you don't have a choice, right? It's harder when it's deliberate and you're asking people to change because they have a choice there. And that's where you hear this whole thing about great resignation and, great rehiring. Why are you hearing that?
Yeah.
Right? Because people have come out of that with greater awareness, right? And they're saying, I want a better work-life balance. I want a different career. I don't want to go through this kind of a thing again, right? And that's what's giving them more choice. So what will that do to your culture? If your culture is going to see a skill shift, if your culture is going to see, and then of course the social justice movement, right? Yeah. So organizations now have a social accountability, heightened one. They should always have had it. Forever, they should have had it, right? Social justice should have been there forever. But if you're saying purposefully, it's time, we gotta do it, and you're gonna have more diverse, employee population, or you have a diverse employee population, you're gonna put more effort into being a more inclusive environment. You're influencing the culture. So I really think it's important for whoever's looking into this transformation and leadership and all of that to really understand that you can just change the externality until you've gone back and looked at where your culture stands right now. And the reason reimagining leadership is so important is because leadership is the prime factor that influences culture, right? Yeah. So when I talk about emotional intelligence and I say leaders who are not aware of who they are, how they're leading or influence the culture, that's a recipe for disaster, right? And we know that 70% of transformational changes fail, right? That's reality. That's evidence-based management practice. And so if you really don't want your transformational change effort to fail going forward, right? Because now it's deliberate, it's not forced on you. Now you're steering the ship forward based on, this is where I landed after the last 2 years. This is where I'm headed, right? And this is the workforce I have to get. Understand the disconnect. I'm sure there's a disconnect in every organization, and you got to find that balance. And, once again, I'm going to go back to doctoral research where I studied the concept of aligning attention to intention. Where do we fail is, leadership has the intent, but their attention is not, where it's needed to actually align to that intent. So when there's a disconnect between your attention and intention, you're not going to achieve your goals. Align your attention to your intent. If your intent is you're transforming your business, your attention should be on the workforce that's going to help you transform that business and align that. And that's what upskilling is about. That's what understanding from a humanitarian value-based leadership perspective, what their needs are, right? I'm going to ask you to work with me a lot because I'm transforming the business. How can I be there for you so that you can do for me what I need from you, right? So it's a two-way thing. And I understand it's easier said than done because there are a lot of variables that play a role into this. But again, you're positioned as a leader to be able to influence them, right? And that's the job you signed up for.
Absolutely. And how many of these great lines do you have? Really, aligning attention with intention. I'm like, what? Of course you wrote that.
Well, I have
you have so many of them. I feel like you dropped like 3 or 4 already. And I'm just like, every time like, all right, what's the next one? Come on, that's amazing.
Well, honestly, I don't claim any of these, and it's not a proprietary, right? It's my learning. I'm a lifelong learner, and there's so much wisdom out there, and it's just, you have to be there to understand the wisdom and embrace it and absorb it.
Of course. And I know you'd be humble about it, but that's why I had to bring it out. Like, that's why I had to. And speaking of really just kind of giving back and your involvement over and above, obviously your writing, your thought leadership, the articles you put out. Also, I know we'll be working on a book together. I'll save that for a moment for the audience, but I know that you're also very active with a number of organizations. You mentioned emotional intelligence earlier. I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about your work around that, maybe in 6 seconds.
Yeah. So thank you for bringing that up. So I am involved with other organizations in the industry. The two that I would talk about where I'm really very passionately involved. Of course, my 2 positions that you called out, my role at UC Davis Health plus my job management, my obligations to my students, to my clients, the organizations I serve definitely don't leave me with too much time for the other things I do, but I try to. 6 Seconds is the organization. It's actually the world's largest network of emotional intelligence for emotional intelligence. And I'm very thankful to 6 Seconds. 6 Seconds came into my life when I did my doctoral dissertation because I was out there researching how do I want to measure emotional intelligence of leaders. And I was at Stanford that time, prior to joining UC Davis Health, I was at Stanford on the healthcare side for 14 years and grew up there as a leader. And I wanted a model that would really, really be very much action oriented because I was going to collect data in a practitioner environment from real leaders and real staff and look at their real engagement numbers and during real transformational change, right? I did not want it to be a secondary data. I wanted it to be a primary data, really collected in a true transformational environment. And that's when I came across 6 Seconds because their model is very practice oriented. It's very action oriented to bring change in organizations. So their emotional intelligence model is about, starting with knowing yourself first, which is again, the first primary consideration of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. Choosing yourself. Once you know yourself, you choose yourself on how you're going to respond, not react, and then giving yourself. How do you then give yourself, which is the higher purpose and the higher calling, which is your empathy. There's so much about empathy these days, right? Yes. And again, it begs the question because empathy stood out in my research dissertation at that time. And I did my research, finished my research in 2015. I got my doctorate. And empathy was an overarching theme for leader effectiveness in driving transformation. Guess what? Here we are, 2020, 2021, 2022. It's all over the place. And I'm saying, well, guys, it was always there. Yes. I validated that in my research dissertation. Nothing else from a leader's emotional intelligence mattered more than empathy in the findings of my study during transformational change. Okay, so it's such a reassurance and such a validation. Right. I feel like the research findings from my dissertation have been generalized now after this pandemic. Right. But so 6 Seconds, I would strongly encourage, honestly, the audience to go to their website, take a look at their website. They've recently published a paper on a neuroscience scientist's spending a day with them and talking about specifically empathy and how our brains are hardwired. Our brains are wired for empathy. And yes, we are not all empathetic at the same level from how we are wired individually. We are wired individually differently. So that's not definitely the most robust competency that all of us have. But the beauty of emotional intelligence and the science of brain is you can acquire that skill and you can shift yourself, from the perspective on the continuum, which stays true for every competency associated with emotional intelligence. I certainly want to take this opportunity to talk about the other organization I'm involved with, and I'm on the board of directors for an institution called IRM. It stands for International Association for Human Resource Information Management, and it's so significant right now, given the digitalization conversations that are going on everywhere, from a transformational perspective for leaders to be digital savvy and having a digitalized strategy. I think that's now part and parcel of all the business conversations and business strategies, right? And IRM is the only organization in the industry that is specifically dedicated to human resource information management, HRIT, right? We have SHRM, another organization that address the whole continuum of HR functions, but this is the one that's only for HR technology. And I've just wrapped up my first 3 years of board term with them, and I continue to be on their SME board now. They have a certification on HRIT. They have industry advocacy, and there's a lot. I would strongly recommend that, people do take a look at IRM and see, this is a pressing time where they're going to have a lot of information there, right, to educate organizations and leaders.
So, I mean, that's great. And I know we've gone through quite a bit, and I know that you have a lot on your plate. But first off, I just want to say congratulations and welcome publicly I'm so excited to have you in one of our upcoming books that'll be released later this year. So when I got the call from the other co-founder here, Chirag, saying, "Oh, Ekta's going to be in the next book," and that you and him had spoken, I'm like, "Oh, this is going to be exciting." So we won't go into the content very deeply today, because I'm going to definitely 100% bring you back on the show so that we can do a deep dive into the content and what you write. But I just want to say, first off, just congratulations on being selected for the next book. Really excited to have you in it.
I am so excited and thankful to have the opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to it. The beauty of the book is it's a combination. I'm going to be partnering. I'm a co-author, and I'm going to be partnering with a lot of healthcare experts. It's the one I'm going for is the healthcare, and my contribution is going to be on leadership and transformation. And I'm so honored to be part of that initiative. And there are going to be a lot of wisdom from other healthcare experts in the clinical area and what their learnings have been and what they want to share with the rest of the world. So very thankful for the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm excited as well, and excited to promote this and to get these ideas out there to help people. And really, that's the whole goal, is how do we help people? How do we help? In this case, in your writing will be transformation and leadership, which we need. So I'm excited about this. Other than that, I mean, what's next? I mean, what's the next for you? What's next for your writing? What's next for your work?
Well, you've already started with the big bang of what's next for me, right? Of course, my next Forbes article is going to be published soon. So I strongly encourage, I have an executive profile with Forbes as a Forbes influencer. So if people want to go and take a look at what I've written in the past, certainly, I'd appreciate it. And please send me feedback. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to engage. Besides that, honestly, my speaking engagements, I have a couple of speaking engagements, as a keynote speaker that are lined up. And, for me, it's the calling. There to serve the organizations that I associate myself with, and, the passion that I come to work every day with, both at UC Davis Health, as well as my obligation to my students as the adjunct management faculty. So it's what I've chosen to be, that's going to continue.
It's great. And if somebody's watching this and are listening to this and they want to connect with your work overall, I know whether it's maybe keynote speaking or just other things in general, they want to read your work overall, like what's the best way for people to connect or to reach out?
LinkedIn. So I've been very social media shy. It's very interesting. I'm interviewing with you, Adam. For a very long time, I was very social media shy, and I didn't get into LinkedIn until after the whole world was in it for several years, right? But that's the prime way of connecting with me. So feel free to follow me. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm very open to connecting. If you want to send me a connect request, go to the Forbes profile page that I have. My keynote speaking session, a lot of the podcasts that I have interviewed in and appeared in, they where I've been featured are in my LinkedIn profile, but I do have people who reach out to me, and I'm more than happy to share my recordings from the past and engage with them. So, and of course, I'm working on my webpage, which will be out soon, but it's not there yet, so I can't share that right now with you.
Not a problem. We'll get all those links. As I mentioned, my team will put all those in the show notes so people can just head right on over and check out your work and the profile page and also LinkedIn page. And it's not surprising to me. We got you, because I'm like, we're persistent. I'm like, no, we're getting Ekta on the
show.
Are.
I can say that. I've gone through the experience. You are persistent. You got me here.
Hey, well,
thank you very much.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, and to the audience that's tuning in. As always, thank you for tuning in. Number one, but number two, if this is your first time engaging with the Mission Matters platform overall, we're all about bringing on entrepreneurs and experts and executives, and really just having them share why they do what they do. Like, how are they going out there into the world and spreading their mission in order to make a difference? If that's the type of content you're into, or that sounds exciting to you, we definitely invite you to hit that subscribe button, because we have many more mission-based individuals coming up on the line, and we don't want you to miss a thing. And Ekta, really, truly, I enjoyed this conversation with you today. I learned a lot. I hope the audience learned a lot as well. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you for having me, Adam. Thank you very much.